I decided to get into genealogy when the rest of my family did. It started with my mother. She had always been curious about her origins, being adopted and never knowing much about her biological parents. One day, she bought herself a DNA test kit, hoping to find family ties we didn't know existed. I remember watching her as she carefully packed away the sample, excitement bubbling under her usual calm exterior. For her, this was more than just a hobby. It was about answering questions she'd carried with her all her life. When the results came back, they gave her something she hadn't known she was missing, a sense of comfort, of belonging. She'd always been grateful for her adoptive parents. They gave her a comfortable, happy childhood, and she'd never felt unloved. But there was something about connecting the dots of your lineage that had its own kind of satisfaction. Knowing who you came from, what they were like, it anchored her in a way I hadn't expected. My life wasn't quite the same mystery. I knew both of my biological parents, and we had a pretty clear understanding of our family tree, or so I thought. But something about the way my mother lit up, piecing together fragments of her past, made me wonder if there was more to uncover. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to give it a shot as well. I managed to convince my brother to join me in the genealogy deep dive, though he wasn't exactly thrilled about it. He had this weird thing about sending his DNA to a lab, muttering about how it was going to end up in some database, sold to the highest bidder. I remember him going on about giant companies selling his genetic information for God knows what. He joked about waking up one day to find some creepy clone of him wandering around. I, on the other hand, couldn't care less. I mean, sure, privacy is important, but I figured we had bigger problems in the world than worrying about some lab tech messing with my DNA. It's not like it's tied to my social security number or anything, right? Months passed without much thought. My mother continued to obsess over her family tree, filling out branches that had been blank for decades. It became a project for her, a way to honor the past she hadn't been able to touch before. Meanwhile, my brother and I let the whole thing fade into the background. Then one morning, an email from the genealogy site hit my inbox. My results were ready. I logged in, not really expecting anything out of the ordinary, but curiosity pushed me through the sign-in process. As expected, the usual suspects showed up. My brother, of course, despite all his paranoia. My parents, my aunts, uncles, grandparents. A handful of cousins I barely kept in touch with. Some of the profiles had been filled in by other users on the site. My mother naturally seemed to have gotten everyone roped into her genealogy obsession. There were also a few distant relatives I didn't recognize. Some names had a faint familiar ring to them, but most were complete strangers. Still, nothing shocking. What caught my eye, though, were the names under my mother's biological family, the ones we had never known about before. My biological grandparents were listed there, confirmed by the DNA match, but both had passed away several years ago. I wasn't sure why, but seeing their names, people I'd never met yet shared a connection with, felt strange. Like suddenly there was a gap in my life that I hadn't known existed. While scrolling through the matches, one name caught my eye, a second cousin on my mother's side named Roger. I didn't recognize it, but that wasn't surprising since this whole branch of the family was still a mystery to us. For anyone unfamiliar with genealogy, a second cousin is the grandchild of a grand uncle or aunt. So Roger would have been connected to my mother's biological family, people we had never known about until recently. His profile wasn't fully filled out, which was odd considering most people on the site at least had basic information like birth years or locations. But one thing stood out clearly. Roger was alone. His side of the family tree had no other surviving members, just a series of names that faded into the past, marked with dates of death. All the other relatives on my mother's biological side were deceased. It was unsettling to see that out of an entire branch of the family, this one person was all that was left. My mother had gone into this journey hoping to connect with relatives she had never known, and now it seemed that there wasn't much family left to meet. So much for her dream of reuniting with long-lost relatives. But at least she was happy, knowing where she came from, even if the connections she had hoped for were more distant than she imagined. Roger, though, a lone name among the dead, lingered in my mind. Something about it stuck with me. Roger and I were on the same level of descendants, meaning he was probably around my age. It felt strange to think that I might have a second cousin out there who I'd never met, someone who shared a bloodline with me but was, in every other sense, a stranger. Curiosity got the better of me, and I figured I'd reach out. According to his profile, Roger hadn't logged in for a few years, but I thought it was worth a shot anyway. Maybe he didn't know about the new matches, or maybe he just lost interest in genealogy over time. I spent a while crafting a message. I didn't want to come off as too pushy or make it weird. I explained my mother's situation, that she had been adopted and after finding her biological family, had convinced the rest of us to join her on this website. I mentioned that we were probably second cousins, and though we'd never met, it might be fun to chat about shared interests, work, and other small talk. You know, family stuff. Even if we had never crossed paths before, we were connected by blood, and that had to count for something. To make things easier, I included my personal email in case he didn't want to bother logging back into the site. Maybe he didn't even use it anymore, I thought, so this might give him a simpler way to respond. After one last read-through, I hit send and felt a little spark of excitement. Maybe this was the beginning of something interesting, a chance to connect with someone who shared a part of the family history I didn't even know existed until recently. I wasn't expecting too much, but still, it felt like a step forward. Then, silence. Months passed and I never heard anything back from Roger. At first, I figured he was just busy or didn't check the site anymore. After all, his profile had been inactive for years when I found it. Over time, I paid it little mind, brushing it off as just another dead end in the process. I had done my part, and if he wanted to get in touch, he would. Just like Roger, our family's interest in the genealogy website faded over time. What had started as a fun dive into the unknown slowly fizzled out once we'd learned what could be gleaned from it. It had its moment, but like most fads, it didn't last, and eventually we all stopped logging in. The family tree was built, the questions were answered, and that was that. By the time April came around, spring was in full swing. My mother, always the social butterfly, decided it was time for a big family get-together. Not just our immediate family either. She convinced my father to host a gathering for our aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole extended clan. It had been a while since we'd all come together, and she was determined to make it happen. My parents still lived on the same 10-acre plot of land in the country, the house my brother and I had grown up in. Nothing much had changed over the years. My father still had his barn, which was more of a storage space for his collection of tools and machinery than anything else. The tractor he hadn't touched in years still sat there, gathering dust, but somehow still a point of pride for him. My mother kept herself busy with her garden, which was in full bloom by spring, and a small pen of 3 chickens that she used for eggs. It wasn't a farm exactly, but it kept her occupied and content. Every time I visited, she made sure to give me a tour of her plants and the chickens like it was the first time I'd seen them. I lived about 40 minutes away, closer to civilization and closer to work. The drive was easy enough and I made it regularly, but the place always felt like a snapshot of my childhood. A place where everything stayed the same, even though life had moved on. Going back for family gatherings always stirred up a mix of nostalgia and distance. But this time, with the whole family expected to be there, it promised to be a bigger affair than usual. I arrived a little later than planned, pulling up to my parents' house to find dozens of cars already lined up along the gravel driveway and the grass on the side of the road. It looked like I was one of the last to show up, but that wasn't too surprising. I had hit some traffic on the way over. The house felt just as familiar as ever, but with all the cars and people milling about, it seemed more alive than usual. Out back, my dad had set up tables and chairs near my mom's garden and the chicken pen. He'd even dragged out a couple of old fold-out tables, their legs wobbling slightly on the uneven ground. People were already seated, chatting in little groups, their voices carrying across the yard in a constant hum of conversation. The smell of grilled meat wafted through the air, and for a moment I was reminded of summer cookouts from my childhood. My mom spotted me almost as soon as I stepped out of the car. She made a beeline toward me, a wide smile on her face, and pulled me into one of her trademark hugs, the kind that was warm and a little too tight but always made you feel like you were home. She kissed me on the cheek, patting my arm like she hadn't seen me in years. "I'm so glad you made it," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Everyone's here." My dad followed behind her, more reserved but just as happy to see me. He extended his hand for a handshake, his grip firm as always, but before I could pull away, he pulled me into a quick hug, clapping me on the back. "Good to see you, son," he said, his voice steady, as if he hadn't been waiting all day for me to show up. But I knew he had. I made my way through the backyard, mingling with family as I went. My aunts and uncles were scattered around, laughing and catching up like it hadn't been months since the last time we all got together. They welcomed me into their conversations, asking about work, life, and when I was going to settle down. The usual stuff. Then there were my cousins, people I used to hang out with all the time as a kid but barely saw anymore. Back then, we spent our summers running wild on this very property, playing tag in the fields and building makeshift forts out of old wood my dad had stored in the barn. But now, with work and life taking over, we rarely had the chance to connect. Still, seeing them brought back those memories, and for a while it felt like old times as we shared stories and laughed about things that seemed so far away from the present. The truth was, these big family gatherings felt a little distant to me now. The only people I really kept in touch with were my parents and my brother. Life had gotten busy, and the ties that used to feel strong had loosened over time. I wasn't sure when it had happened, but at some point I'd just drifted from everyone else. The big cousin group I used to hang out with, we'd barely exchanged more than pleasantries at these events anymore. Not long after I arrived, my brother showed up with his family in tow. His two boys, my nephews, spotted me as soon as they hopped out of the car. They ran over with the kind of boundless energy only kids seem to have, giving me quick, enthusiastic hugs before darting off to join the other kids running around in the yard. "Good to see you, man," my brother said, walking up with his wife by his side. We hugged briefly and then fell into the usual conversation. We found a spot by the grill where the scent of sizzling burgers filled the air. With our drinks in hand, we started catching up. I told him about my job, how I'd been stuck in spreadsheets all day long, losing myself in numbers and data. It wasn't the most exciting gig, but it paid the bills. He gave me a sympathetic nod, but didn't seem too surprised. He knew my work had taken over most of my time. He told me about his sales job, how the company was doing well, and how he'd been hitting his targets consistently. "Pays the bills, keeps the kids fed," he said with a grin. "Not much more you can ask for these days, right?" Our conversation drifted toward nostalgia, as it often did when we had a rare moment to talk without distractions. We reminisced about the days when we used to play Dungeons and Dragons together. Late nights rolling dice around the kitchen table, getting lost in imaginary worlds. And of course, we talked about the time we spent in our old World of Warcraft guild, raiding dungeons and staying up way too late on school nights. For a moment, we both wished we could go back to those simpler times when the biggest worries we had were gear drops and dungeon bosses. Man, those were the days, he said, shaking his head with a smile. No real responsibilities, just games and good times. Yeah, I agreed, staring out at the field where the kids were playing. Sometimes I wish we could hit pause and go back, even just for a little while. He smiled at that, but then he glanced over at his wife, who was chatting with our mom, and at his kids, who were laughing with the others. Yeah, but I wouldn't trade this for the world, he said softly, nodding toward them. As much as I miss those days, I'm thankful for what I've got now. I smiled, understanding. Life had changed, and while things were more complicated now, there was beauty in it too. Maybe I didn't have kids of my own, but I could see the fulfillment my brother had in his. It made me wonder if there was a part of my life I was missing. A little while later, my mother pulled me aside. Her face lit up with the same excitement she always had when she wanted to show me something new. Come on, I have to show you the apiary, she said, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. I couldn't help but smile. My mom never did anything halfway. We walked across the yard past her blooming garden to a small corner of the property where she had set up a few beehives. Italian honey bees, she announced proudly. They're the best for pollinating gardens. Did you know they can visit up to 5,000 flowers in a single day? She was on a roll, rattling off facts about how these bees were more docile than other types and how fast they were producing honey. She even started embellishing a little, as she often did when she was really into something. You know, bees communicate by dancing. It's called the waggle dance. They can tell each other exactly where to find flowers with that. I nodded along, throwing in the occasional, "That's great, Mom," or "Wow, really?" But honestly, I was only halfway paying attention. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and instinctively I pulled it out to check. I saw an email notification pop up on the screen. "Sorry, Mom, just a second," I said, holding up a hand. "I just need to make sure it's not something important for work." She gave me a quick, understanding nod, though I could tell she was eager to keep talking about her bees. As she continued discussing how the bees were already working her garden, I glanced down at my phone and opened the email, apologizing quietly again for the interruption. It wasn't a work email. The sender's address was just a string of random numbers and letters, almost like someone had smashed their hands on a keyboard. The domain it came from was just as nonsensical. No subject line, nothing to give away what it was about, just the cold, empty blank of an anonymous message. What really caught my attention, though, were the attachments. Against my better judgment, I tapped on the first one. It was a picture of me, taken just moments earlier. I was standing by my car, the same car that was now parked in my parents' driveway. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly swiped to the next image, another picture of me, this time greeting my parents in the backyard. The next one was of me crouching down to hug my nephews, their faces blurred as they darted away to play with the other kids. Then, another. This one showed me standing by the grill talking with my brother, our drinks in hand, mid-conversation. Every photo was taken from a distance, but it was clear that whoever had snapped them had been watching. I kept scrolling, my fingers shaking slightly as each new image brought a fresh wave of dread. How long had someone been out there? How had they known I was here today? I felt the blood drain from my face and my stomach churned as I flipped through the pictures. A part of me wanted to believe it was some sick joke, but the pit in my gut told me otherwise. This wasn't a prank. Someone had been watching me and they wanted me to know it. "Hey, is everything okay?" my mother asked, her voice snapping me back to the present. I must have looked pale as a ghost because her eyes were filled with concern. I tried to respond, but I couldn't find the words. I just stood there, staring at the screen, dumbstruck. Was this a joke? A sudden, piercing scream cut through the chatter, freezing everyone in place. It came from near the chicken coop. My aunt. Her voice was shrill, full of panic, and within seconds all heads turned in that direction. I followed the others, my legs moving on instinct as I shoved my phone into my pocket. People were already gathering around the small pen, my mom pushing through the crowd, her face contorted with worry. Then I saw it. All 3 of the chickens were sprawled in the straw, their bodies still, their feathers matted with blood. Each of their throats had been cleanly slit, their bodies limp, blood soaking into the straw below them. The air seemed to hang heavy with the coppery scent of death. My mother gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide in shock. She had loved those chickens, fussed over them like they were her pets. Now they lay butchered in their pen, their tiny lives snuffed out in the most violent way. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I could hear my aunts and cousins murmuring in confusion, some of them crying, others backing away from the grim sight. My father was already inspecting the coop, looking for signs of what could have done this, but no fox or raccoon would have left them like this. This was deliberate. Someone had done this. I felt a sinking weight settle in my stomach. It wasn't just the dead chickens that disturbed me. It was the timing. I had just received those photos moments before this happened. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy as I pulled it back out, praying that what I had seen wasn't real. But as I looked down, my heart skipped a beat. The email was still there, staring back at me. Below the string of random numbers and letters in the body of the message were 5 simple words. It's nice to see family. I stood there feeling the world tilt around me, trying to piece everything together. The yard erupted into chaos. My aunts and uncles scrambled to usher the children inside, doing their best to shield them from the grisly sight. Some of the kids were confused, asking questions in nervous tones, while others started crying once they realized something was wrong. The adults tried to keep it together, voices hushed but frantic as they worked to keep the panic from spreading. My mother was beside herself, tears streaming down her face as she stood frozen, staring at the covered chicken pen in disbelief. Who would do this? She kept asking, her voice shaky and broken. Why would anyone do this? I put an arm around her, trying to calm her down, but her hands were trembling too much to even hold on to me. Mom, it's okay, I whispered, though I wasn't even sure I believed that myself. We'll figure it out, Dad's handling it. Meanwhile, my father had grabbed a tarp from his garage and draped it over the chicken pen, hiding the grisly scene. He worked quickly, his face grim and determined. I could tell he was upset, but he wasn't letting it show. Not yet, not in front of everyone. For now, the goal was to keep the peace and let people get back to the gathering without worrying about what had just happened. At least until they left. But I couldn't let it go. I had to tell them what I knew. Once most of the kids were inside and the commotion had died down a bit, I pulled my parents and my brother aside, away from the others. I hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. Then, without saying anything, I showed them my phone, flipping it open to the email with the photos. The pictures of me arriving, the pictures of me greeting my parents, the pictures of me playing with my nephews, laughing with my brother. I watched as their faces turned pale, the realization sinking in. I think whoever sent these took the pictures from over there. I pointed off the property toward the tree line that lined the back of my parents' land. There was something dark and ominous about it now. I didn't notice anything at first, but the angle, it has to be from that direction. They were silent, eyes flicking between me and the tree line. There's something else, I continued, my voice lower, almost hesitant to say it out loud. You remember Roger, the second cousin I found on the Genealogy website? I reached out to him months ago, but I never heard back. He's the only living relative on Mom's biological side. It could be a coincidence, but I don't think so. My mother wiped her tears, confused. What are you saying? I took a deep breath. I'm saying, unless someone in our family decided to play a sick joke, which doesn't make sense, none of us would do something like this. Then, it might be Roger. He's the only one we don't know. My brother shook his head slowly, the disbelief clear on his face. This doesn't make sense. Why would he do something like this? I mean, he didn't even respond to you. I don't know, I said, swallowing hard, the words catching in my throat. But whoever sent this knows us. They've been watching. We all stood there in heavy silence, the weight of the situation settling over us like a dark cloud. My mother looked like she might collapse, her face pale and her hands trembling as she stared at the email on my phone. She had gone quiet, processing what I had just said about Roger, about the photos, about everything. My father, seeing the state she was in, didn't waste any time. He immediately pulled out his phone and started dialing the police, his jaw clenched tight. He walked a few steps away as he spoke to the dispatcher, explaining that something strange was going on, that someone had been watching us. I turned to my brother, but before I could say anything, he was already shaking his head. I knew this was a bad idea, he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. I told you I didn't trust that genealogy site, putting our DNA, our family out there. It's like handing over your entire life to strangers. His words hit me like a slap, and I could feel the frustration bubbling up inside me. You think I wanted this? I snapped, trying to keep my voice down but failing. How was I supposed to predict this? I was just trying to help Mom find her family. None of us thought it would lead to this. He was angry, and so was I, but before we could say anything else, he turned away from me and started gathering his family. I'm taking them home, he said, his voice colder than I'd heard in a long time. This is too much for my kids. They didn't see the chickens, and I'm not letting them get dragged into this mess or questioned by the police. Call us if you need anything, but we're leaving. My mother looked at him, panic flickering in her eyes. Please don't go, she said, her voice shaky. We're all scared, but we need to stick together. I get that, Mom, he said, softening for a moment as he put a hand on her shoulder. But I've got to think about them, he added, nodding toward his wife and kids who were already heading to the car. It's too much. My father had finished his call with the police, and he walked over just in time to hear my brother say he was leaving. You don't have to go, he said, his voice firm but pleading. We can handle this together. But my brother was already set. No, Dad, I'm sorry, but I can't risk this with my family. I stood there watching helplessly as my brother ushered his wife and kids into the car. He gave me a quick, curt nod before sliding into the driver's seat and starting the engine. Without another word, they pulled away, the car kicking up dust as they disappeared down the long driveway. The silence after they left was deafening. My parents stood there looking smaller somehow, like the weight of everything was finally sinking in. We were left to face whatever this was, and I wasn't sure how to make sense of any of it. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, their flashing lights cutting through the fading daylight as they pulled up to the house. 2 officers stepped out of their car, their expressions serious as they made their way over to us. My father met them first, shaking their hands and leading them toward the chicken coop. The rest of us hovered nearby, waiting for some sort of direction, but it was clear that none of us knew what to expect. They moved methodically, walking around the coop and the perimeter of the yard, looking for any sign of an intruder. They checked the tree line where I thought the photos had been taken, but after a while they came back empty-handed. No footprints, no sign of anyone, one of the officers said, glancing at his partner. If someone was out here, they didn't leave much behind. Frustration welled up inside me. Whoever did this had to have been watching us. They had taken photos, they had killed the chickens, but there was nothing to go on. It felt like a dead end. I pulled out my phone again, showing the officers the email I had received. "This is what I got," I said, handing it over. "The sender's address is just a random string of letters and numbers, and it came with these photos. They were taken right here today, while we were all outside." I scrolled through the pictures one by one, letting the officers see each one. The officers exchanged a look before turning back to me. "And you said this started after you reached out to a relative on a genealogy website?" one of them asked. "Yeah," I nodded. "Months ago. His name is Roger. He's the only living relative on my mom's biological side. I never heard back from him though, and now this." I gestured to the phone and then the coupe, feeling helpless. The officers took down everything I told them, writing notes and asking follow-up questions about the email and the website. "We'll try to trace the email and see where it leads," one of them said. "It might take some time, but we'll do what we can." They moved on to questioning the rest of my family, going through each relative, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual that day. But it was the same story from everyone. No one had noticed anything out of the ordinary. The only thing that had drawn attention was the scream from my aunt when she discovered the chickens. I could see the officers getting frustrated too. It was like the intruder had left no trace, no sign they had even been there apart from the pictures and the blood-soaked straw beneath the tarp-covered coop. As they wrapped up their questioning, I felt a gnawing sense of unease settle deeper in my gut. Whoever did this had been watching us, watching me, and now we had no idea who it was or when they might come back. The aunt who had screamed was my father's sister, my mother's sister-in-law, the same one who had helped my mother incubate and hatch those chickens just a few months earlier. They'd worked together to raise them, nurturing them like pets. For my mom, losing them like this wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was personal. She stood by the coop, still visibly shaken, leaning on my dad for support as the police finished up. Most of the family had already left by the time the sun started dipping below the horizon. My brother had been gone for a while, and now my aunts, uncles, and cousins were beginning to trickle out one by one, all of them casting nervous glances toward the tree line as they made their way to their cars. I lingered, wanting to stay behind to help and make sure everything was in order before I left. After the police had taken their final notes and left the scene, it was just me, my parents, and the empty yard. My father and I set about cleaning up the mess. We wrapped the remains of the chickens carefully, trying to be as respectful as possible, though it felt like a grim task. My mother watched from a distance, still in shock, her eyes hollow as she stared at the pen that now stood lifeless. Once the chickens were taken care of, I spent the next hour or so trying to reassure her, telling her over and over again that everything would be all right. "The police are on it, Mom," I said, rubbing her back as we sat on the porch. "They'll find whoever did this. It'll be okay." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced, and truth be told, neither was I. The words I was saying felt empty, hollow. How could I reassure her when I was terrified myself? My stomach was twisted in knots, my mind racing with every worst-case scenario. Whoever had done this had been close, watching us, taking pictures, waiting for the right moment. And the police hadn't found anything, no sign of them. It felt like we were just waiting for the next move, blind to where it might come from. But I couldn't let my mom see how scared I was, so I stayed as long as I could, sticking close to her and doing my best to offer comfort, even if it was only surface level. When it was finally time to go, I hugged her tight, promising to check in tomorrow and reminding her to lock the doors. I got into my car and drove away, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. The entire drive home, my heart pounded in my chest and the email's words echoed in my head. It's nice to see family. Even though I had tried to reassure her, I was scared to my core. Every word of comfort I'd offered my mom felt like a lie. a desperate attempt to mask the growing dread that was gnawing at me. As I drove home, the familiar winding country road seemed darker than usual, the trees on either side casting long shadows across the pavement. My mind kept replaying the events of the day, the dead chickens, the photos, that chilling email. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching, lurking just out of sight. About halfway home, my phone buzzed again, jolting me from my thoughts. I instinctively reached for it, my hand trembling as I unlocked the screen. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the notification. Another email. Like the first one, the sender was a string of random characters, impossible to trace. My pulse quickened and my stomach churned as I stared at the message. Drive safe, that was all it said. 2 words, but they were enough to send a cold wave of terror washing over me. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked up from the screen, scanning the empty road ahead. My headlights cut through the darkness, but everything beyond that was shrouded in shadow. Whoever had sent the email, whoever had killed those chickens, taken those pictures, they were still watching. They knew where I was, what I was doing, and now they were reaching out again, reminding me that I wasn't alone. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening on the steering wheel as I glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, no cars trailing behind me, no figures hiding in the trees, but it didn't matter. The feeling of being watched clung to me, suffocating in its intensity. My mind raced. Had they followed me from my parents' house? Were they out there now, just beyond the reach of my headlights, waiting for the next moment to strike? My stomach twisted with fear, and I found myself driving faster, desperate to reach the safety of home. I wanted to pull over to stop and catch my breath, but the thought of being stranded out here alone on the dark road was worse. I kept driving, every sense on high alert, my heart thudding in my ears. I needed to get home. I needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere with locked doors and walls between me and whoever this was. As I neared the edge of town, the lights of civilization finally flickered on the horizon, but the fear didn't ease. Not really. The message haunted me. Drive safe. It wasn't a threat, but it was worse somehow. It was a reminder that they were always there, always watching, and that no matter where I went, I wasn't beyond their reach. I pulled into my driveway, parking quickly and rushing inside, locking the door behind me the second I stepped through. I leaned against it, breathing hard, my mind still reeling. I checked the windows, turned on every light, but no amount of reassurance could stop the cold knot of fear tightening in my chest. I glanced at my phone one last time, the screen still glowing with the words that had shaken me to my core. Drive safe. For the first time, I realized that safety was no longer something I could take for granted, not anymore. Whoever this was, they weren't done. And I had no idea what they were planning next.